Growing up, I had always been fascinated by the stories of the Pine Barrens in New Jersey. The dense forest, the eerie silence, and the tales of the Jersey Devil lurking in the shadows intrigued me. When I had the opportunity to move to a small town on the edge of the Pine Barrens, I jumped at the chance. Little did I know my fascination would turn into a nightmare. I found a quaint little house on the outskirts of the forest. It was the perfect place for a writer like me, isolated, quiet, and surrounded by nature. The first few months were peaceful. I spent my days writing and exploring the woods, enjoying the solitude. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, I decided to take a walk in the forest. The trees cast long shadows and the air was cool and crisp. As I ventured deeper into the woods, I noticed an old, overgrown path that I hadn't seen before. Curiosity got the better of me, and I decided to follow it. The path led me to an abandoned cabin, its wooden walls covered in moss and ivy. The windows were shattered, and the door hung off its hinges. I felt a strange pull to enter, despite the unease that settled in my gut. I stepped inside and the floorboards creaked under my weight. The interior was dark and musty, with the remnants of old furniture scattered about. As I explored the cabin, I found a small, dusty journal tucked away in a drawer. The pages were yellowed with age, but the writing was still legible. The journal belonged to a man named Samuel, who had lived in the cabin many years ago. As I read through the journal, a sense of dread washed over me. Samuel wrote about strange occurrences, unexplained noises, shadows that moved on their own, and a feeling of being watched. He mentioned seeing a ghostly figure, a woman in white, who would appear at night and disappear without a trace. Samuel's entries grew more frantic and paranoid, ending abruptly with a plea for help. I left the cabin, the journal clutched tightly in my hands. The sun had set and the forest was now shrouded in darkness. I made my way back to my house, feeling a sense of urgency. That night, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched. The woods outside my window seemed more sinister, the trees casting eerie shadows in the moonlight. The next few days were filled with strange occurrences. I would hear whispers in the dead of night, too faint to make out the words, but chilling nonetheless. Objects in my house would move on their own, books falling off shelves, doors creaking open, and once I found all the kitchen cabinets open, their contents scattered on the floor. One night as I lay in bed, I saw a shadow move across the room. I sat up, my heart pounding, and saw the ghostly figure of a woman standing at the foot of my bed. She was dressed in a tattered white gown, her hair disheveled and her eyes hollow. She stared at me, her expression one of sorrow and longing. "Who are you?" I whispered, my voice trembling. The woman didn't answer. She slowly raised her hand and pointed towards the woods. Then she vanished, leaving the room cold and silent. I couldn't sleep for the rest of the night, my mind racing with fear and confusion. The next day I decided to return to the cabin and find out more about Samuel and the ghostly woman. I spent hours searching the cabin, but there was nothing else to be found. As I was about to leave, I noticed a loose floorboard. I pried it open and found a small metal box hidden beneath. Inside the box were old photographs and letters. The letters were from Samuel to a woman named Emily, expressing his deep love and longing for her. The photographs showed a beautiful woman in a white gown, smiling and happy. It was the same woman I had seen in my bedroom. I realized that Emily was the ghostly figure haunting the woods, and she was trying to communicate with me. I took the letters and photographs back to my house, hoping to find a way to help her find peace. That night, Emily appeared again. This time, she seemed less sorrowful, her presence more calming. I showed her the letters and photographs, hoping to connect with her spirit. She hovered near me, her ethereal form flickering in the moonlight that streamed through the window. "Emily," I said softly, holding out the letters. "Is this you?" The air around me chilled as she drew closer, her eyes fixed on the photographs. She reached out a transparent hand and gently touched the image of herself and Samuel. A faint smile crossed her face, and for a moment, I felt a surge of warmth in the room. "I'm here to help you," I said, my voice barely above a whisper. "What happened to you, Emily?" Her form shimmered, and I sensed her sadness intensify. Images flashed in my mind. Samuel's desperate attempts to communicate with her, the anguish of their separation, and finally the tragic accident that took her life. Emily had wandered the Pine Barrens ever since, unable to find peace. "I can help you find peace," I continued, my heart aching for her. "But I need to know how." Emily's form flickered again, uncertainty clouding her features. I reached out, my hand trembling, and she hesitantly touched it. Her touch was cold but gentle, a reminder of the tragedy that had bound her to this world. Over the next few days, I delved deeper into Samuel's journal and the letters between him and Emily. I learned about their love story, how they had met in the small town, their secret meetings in the woods, and their dreams of a future together. But their happiness was short-lived. Samuel's family disapproved of their relationship, and they were forced to meet in secret. One fateful night, Emily had decided to run away with Samuel. They had planned to leave the town behind and start a new life together. But as Emily made her way through the Pine Barrens, tragedy struck. She fell into a deep ravine, her body discovered days later by a search party. Samuel was devastated, blaming himself for her death. As I read through their story, I felt a deep connection to Emily. She had suffered a terrible loss, her spirit trapped between this world and the next. I knew I had to help her find peace, not just for her sake, but for Samuel's as well. Armed with newfound determination, I returned to the cabin with the letters and photographs. The sun was setting, casting a golden glow over the forest. I placed the items on the floor, arranging them carefully. Then I lit a candle and placed it beside them, its flame flickering in the gathering darkness. "Emily," I called softly, my voice echoing through the empty cabin. "I want to help you find peace. I want to reunite you with Samuel." The air grew still and I sensed her presence nearby. Emily appeared before me, her form translucent but more defined than before. She looked at the photographs and letters, tears shimmering in her eyes. "I'm so sorry, Emily," I said, my voice choked with emotion. "But you don't have to linger here anymore. You can move on." Emily hesitated, her gaze flickering between me and the items on the floor. I reached out a hand, offering it to her. She looked at me, uncertainty clouding her features. But then she placed her hand in mine, her touch sending a chill down my spine. Together we stood in the cabin, surrounded by the memories of a love lost too soon. I closed my eyes and began to recite a prayer, calling upon the spirits of the forest to guide Emily to the other side. The candle flame danced in the darkness, casting shadows on the walls. Suddenly, a gentle breeze filled the cabin, carrying with it a sense of peace and serenity. Emily's form began to glow faintly, her features softening. She looked at me one last time, gratitude and sorrow mingling in her eyes. "Thank you," she whispered, her voice barely audible. And then she was gone. The cabin was silent once more, the only sound the rustling of leaves outside. I stood there for a long moment, feeling a sense of closure and peace wash over me. As I left the cabin and walked back to my house, I knew that Emily had finally found the peace she had been searching for. Her spirit could now rest, reunited with Samuel in the afterlife. The Pine Barrens seemed quieter that night, the shadows less menacing. Years have passed since then, but I still visit the Pine Barrens from time to time. I feel a connection to the forest, a sense of gratitude for the role it played in helping Emily find peace. Her story remains with me, a reminder of the power of love and the strength of the human spirit. And sometimes on quiet nights when the moon is full, I swear I can hear faint laughter echoing through the trees, a reminder that Emily's spirit lives on, finally free from the darkness that once bound her. Several years ago, I took a job as a night security guard at an abandoned sanatorium on the outskirts of town. The pay was good, and I figured it would be an easy gig. My main duties were to patrol the grounds and ensure that no vandals or curious thrill seekers broke in. The building had been empty for decades, but it still held a sinister reputation among the locals. On my first night, I arrived just before sunset. The sanatorium was a massive, decaying structure, its windows shattered and walls covered in ivy. As I walked through their main entrance, the air was thick with the scent of mold and decay. The interior was just as eerie. Long, dark hallways lined with empty rooms, their doors hanging off their hinges. The first few hours were uneventful. I patrolled the ground, checking the perimeter and making sure all the entrances were secure. As the night wore on, I settled into the security office, a small room with a desk, a chair, and a bank of old, dusty monitors. I watched the screens, occasionally glancing at the flickering images of the building's empty corridors. Around midnight, I heard a faint noise, a soft, distant whisper that seemed to come from one of the upper floors. I turned up the volume on the monitors, but the sound didn't repeat. Shaking off the unease, I decided to do another round of the building. The hallways were dimly lit, and my flashlight cast long, eerie shadows. As I climbed the stairs to the second floor, the air grew colder, and the hairs on the back of my neck stood on end. I reached the top of the stairs and shone my light down the corridor. At the far end, I saw a figure standing in the shadows. "Hello?" I called out, my voice echoing off the walls. There was no response. I took a step closer, and the figure moved, disappearing into one of the rooms. My heart raced, but I forced myself to follow. When I reached the room, it was empty, the only sound my own ragged breathing. I continued my patrol, trying to shake off the unsettling encounter. As I passed by one of the old patient rooms, I heard a soft sobbing. I stopped and listened, my heart pounding. The sound was coming from inside. I pushed the door open and stepped inside. The room was empty, but the sobbing continued, growing louder and more desperate. I backed out of the room, my hands shaking. The air was freezing now, my breath visible in the dim light. I decided to head back to the security office, but as I turned to leave, I saw another figure standing at the end of the hallway. This one was closer, and I could see it more clearly. A young woman in a hospital gown, her hair matted and her eyes hollow. "Who are you?" I asked, my voice trembling. The woman didn't answer. She raised her hand, pointing towards me, and then vanished into thin air. I stumbled back, my mind racing. I had heard the stories about the sanatorium, about the patients who had died here under horrific circumstances, but I never believed the tales until now. I made my way back to the security office, my nerves on edge. The monitors flickered, showing static and distorted images. I tried to focus, but my thoughts were scattered. Suddenly, the lights went out, plunging the room into darkness. I fumbled for my flashlight, its beam barely cutting through the gloom. As I sat there trying to calm my racing heart, I heard footsteps approaching. They were slow, deliberate, and getting closer. I turned the flashlight towards the door, but saw nothing. The footsteps stopped just outside, and then I heard a whisper, soft and chilling. "Get out!" I grabbed my radio and called for backup, but the static was the only response. The temperature continued to drop, and I could feel a presence in the room with me. I bolted from the security office, running through the darkened hallways, my flashlight bouncing wildly. As I reached the main entrance, I felt a hand grip my shoulder, icy and cold. I spun around, but no one was there. I pushed open the door and stumbled outside, gasping for breath. The night air was crisp and clear, a stark contrast to the oppressive atmosphere inside. I didn't go back for my shift the next night, or ever again. I couldn't shake the feeling of being watched, of the cold grip on my shoulder. The sanatorium remained a dark looming presence in my nightmares. I moved to a different city, far from the haunting memories, but the experience left a scar on my psyche. Every now and then, I would hear whispers in the dead of night, or feel an icy touch that jolted me awake. I did some research trying to understand what I had experienced. The sanatorium had a grim history. It was originally built in the early 20th century as a tuberculosis hospital, and during its operation, countless patients died within its walls. There were stories of inhumane treatments, neglect, and even rumors of a sadistic doctor who performed cruel experiments on the patients. The institution was shut down in the 1950s, but the suffering and anguish of those who died there seemed to have lingered. One day I received a call from an old friend, Tom, who had taken over my job at the sanatorium. He sounded shaken and asked if we could meet. We arranged to meet at a local diner, and when I saw him, I could tell he was deeply troubled. He had dark circles under his eyes and his hands trembled as he held his coffee cup. "I believe you now," Tom said, his voice barely above a whisper. "It's real, all of it." He told me that he had experienced similar disturbances, footsteps, whispers, and shadowy figures. But what terrified him the most was a specific incident that occurred a few nights ago. He was on his usual patrol when he heard a child's laughter coming from the basement. Gathering his courage, he descended into the dark, musty basement, his flashlight barely illuminating the cobweb-covered walls. As he explored the basement, he saw an old, rusty gurney in the corner. On it sat a small, ghostly figure of a child, her eyes hollow and lifeless. She looked up at him and smiled, but her smile was devoid of any warmth or joy. "Play with me," she said in a sing-song voice, before vanishing into thin air. Tom was visibly shaken as he recounted the story. He admitted that he couldn't continue working there, and I couldn't blame him. The sanatorium was a place of immense sorrow and pain, and whatever spirits haunted its halls were relentless in their torment. We decided to investigate further, hoping to find some closure. We contacted a local historian, Miss Anderson, who had studied the sanatorium's history extensively. She agreed to meet us and share what she knew. Miss Anderson was a woman in her 60s with a calm demeanor that contrasted sharply with the story she told. She spoke of the sanatorium's dark past, confirming the rumors of mistreatment and unethical medical practices. According to her, the doctor who ran the facility, Dr. Heinrich Keller, was notorious for his cruel experiments. Many patients suffered horrific deaths under his care. "There's a lot of unrest in that place," Miss Anderson said. "The spirits of those who died there, especially those who suffered greatly, haven't found peace." She suggested that we visit the site one last time with a plan to perform a ritual to help the spirits move on. She provided us with a list of items we would need: candles, sage, and a prayer she had written. Reluctantly, Tom and I agreed, hoping to put an end to the nightmares. We chose a night when the moon was full, believing it might lend us some protection. The sanatorium looked even more foreboding in the moonlight, its broken windows and crumbling facade casting eerie shadows. We entered the building, our flashlights cutting through this darkness. Miss Anderson led the way, chanting softly as she lit the candles and placed them in strategic locations throughout the building. The atmosphere was tense, the air thick with anticipation. We could feel the presence of the spirits watching us from the shadows. As we reached the basement, the temperature plummeted. The child's laughter echoed once more, sending chills down our spines. Miss Anderson began the ritual, burning sage and reciting the prayer. The air grew heavy, and the shadows seemed to move closer, swirling around us. Suddenly, a cold wind blew through the basement, extinguishing the candles. The laughter turned into cries of pain and anguish. The ghostly figure of the child appeared again, her eyes pleading. "Help us," she whispered, her voice filled with despair. Miss Anderson continued the prayer, her voice growing stronger, more commanding. The spirits around us seemed to react, their cries intensifying before gradually fading away. The oppressive atmosphere began to lift, and for the first time, the sanatorium felt less malevolent. When the ritual was complete, Miss Anderson instructed us to leave the building and never return. She believed that we had helped some of the spirits find peace, but the sanatorium would always be a place of tragedy. Tom and I left the sanatorium feeling a sense of relief, but also a profound sadness for the souls who had suffered there. We parted ways, each of us trying to move on with our lives. The nightmares became less frequent, and the whispers faded, but the experience stayed with me. Years later, I still think about that night. The sanatorium stands as a testament to the horrors of the past, a place where the boundary between the living and the dead is perilously thin. It serves as a haunting reminder of the suffering endured by those who once called it home, and the lingering presence of those who never found peace.